Welcome to the Cosmic Chosen Channel. The world mocked your insight until it matched their headlines. Now they scroll your words like prophecy. You weren't just predicting trends, you were remembering patterns encoded in your bloodline. While the world calls Elon Musk a visionary, what they don't know is his spark came from your flame. Trace it back far enough, and his lineage bends toward yours. Not biologically, but energetically. The codes he's activating now? You carried them first. You were born with ancient foresight, a soul tuned to signals the rest couldn't hear. That's why they laughed. That's why they called you extreme, because according to research, 98% of people reject any truth that threatens their comfort, even if it's right. So when you warned them, you weren't attacking their ideas. You were shaking their illusion of safety. And nothing terrifies people more than discovering they were blind while you saw everything coming. They'll never admit it, but you weren't guessing. You were downloading. And now that the timelines are sinking, they're whispering the truth. Maybe they were chosen after all. You were labeled paranoid. You were referred to as dramatic. Since they were the ones who required treatment once reality hit them hard, it's likely that some of them proposed it. Look around now. The foundations are trembling from the exact collapse you felt. In the middle of the day, the secrets you witnessed developing are blowing out. What about the community? Oh, you knew. And now they're in complete spiritual cardiac arrest. You stated it. And now, everything is falling apart exactly as you predicted. You will see why the selected are always viewed as insane until the world catches up to their trauma-scarred knowledge. If you stick with me through to the end. Let's take a closer look. First of all, you never made any predictions about the future. Everyone else has been taught to ignore what you were just listening to. You were just noticing what was already there. What everyone else was too preoccupied, too emotionally engaged, or too scared to notice. You weren't making predictions about the future. People want to act as though having an intuitive nature entails possessing a mystical crystal ball. It's never been about that for you, though. In a world full of individuals who have taught themselves to turn away, you were just paying attention. Little things like a person's tone changing, their energy changing when specific subjects were brought up, or the hesitancy in their eyes when they claimed to be okay, were all things you observed. Because most individuals live their lives automatically, repeating the same cycles, surrounded by the same kind of people, and making the same excuses, you watched patterns playing out like reruns. When a group dynamic had unseen cracks, when someone's actions didn't match their words, or when something felt strange even though it appeared to be fine on the surface, you could tell. Others didn't want to know the truth, so they missed it. People are uncomfortable with the truth. It requires action. And rather than confront what is truly happening, the majority would prefer to remain cozy in denial. Therefore, others believed you were being negative, exaggerating, or even theatrical when you spoke out early, called out the change, or told them something was developing. However, you just weren't enchanted in the same way that others were. A person selling an image didn't mesmerize you. You weren't preoccupied with being liked, getting approval, or being courteous. You paid attention. You were watching. While they were busy ignoring the numbers, you were making connections. And now, when everything is disintegrating, they all of a sudden recall what you said. They realize all of a sudden that you were clear and not insane. It wasn't what you expected. You saw it. What they don't comprehend is that. The gift is about seeing the truth that was always there, but was concealed by everyone's denial. It is not about seeing the future. Second, You weren't addicted to the communal hallucination, so they assumed you were insane. They thought you were constantly reading too much into things, too deep, or too serious. But let's face it, they were upset that you weren't addicted to the same illusion they were, not that you had a different perspective on the world. You were standing there refusing to comply while everyone else was acting happy and acting like dysfunction was commonplace. You were dangerous because of that. You didn't agree with the phony friendships. You didn't smile despite the dubious actions. You refrained from engaging in the little chat that skirted the major issues in the room. They were alarmed that you were awake in a room full of folks who were sleepwalking. The majority of individuals are bound together by common illusions rather than affection. You destroyed the magic when you stopped pretending. You forced individuals to face things they would like to avoid. You were unexpected because you didn't require continual affirmation or approval. They couldn't reward you with attention or use quiet to control you. You were able to see through the hollow gestures, the subtle power struggles, and the phony apologies. You simply withdrew without arguing about it. And your failure to embrace the fiction they constructed around their brittle egos was what caused that quiet, which wasn't passive. The fact that you didn't recoil in the face of reality is what truly frightened them. Being the only one who saw the storm coming didn't scare you. Because your clarity revealed their denial, they labeled you negative. They knew you were correct, though, deep inside. They're left shaken, acting as though they're astonished by what you've already warned them about. After everything has blown up, the secrets have been revealed, the masks have fallen off, and the reality has hit them in the face. You were never theatrical. Simply said, you were never hooked to acting as though nothing was wrong. Furthermore, such type of honesty is viewed as a danger in a society that is fixated on illusions. Number 3, before the incident even had words, you sensed the tension in their soul. You didn't merely see it coming. You sensed things long before the issue had a name. You didn't only see them before they happened. Your spirit had already taken over the shift before anyone had the courage to voice that something was amiss. Your body was already responding to what their words would not say, while everyone else was still grinning and going through the motions. You could feel the strain rising beneath the surface, which the good-hearted individuals attempt to hide with staged laughter, phony optimism, or well-practiced quiet. People don't realize that your talent is about emotional sensitivity on a level that most people aren't prepared to handle. It's not about having dramatic visions or being clairvoyant. Even when someone says something that sounds flawless, you can sense the deception in their energy. The foundation fracture is discovered before the home begins to tremble. Most individuals wait until something is clear. When the danger indications are still whispers, you can detect them. People first find it very difficult to believe you because of this. You're responding to a fact that hasn't yet come to light completely. Thus, they accuse you of being too sensitive or paranoid. They are unaware that your body responds to unsaid energy in the same way that a fire alarm responds to smoke. It doesn't wait for the flames to appear. You're reading the buildup, the pressure, and the unsolved mess that lies behind their performance, not the future. And what occurs every time? Eventually, what you sensed in your gut becomes obvious. The partnership disintegrates. The secret is revealed. As promised by your spirit, the truth bursts forth. All of a sudden, everyone is acting taken aback. You processed it months ago in the meantime. You were just responding early, not late. Before anybody else realized the ground was moving, you sensed the emotional earthquake. And now, they finally see what you meant. when you mentioned that something didn't feel right. Regretfully, they didn't take your insight seriously until a catastrophe struck. Fourth, they weren't prepared for someone who could detect decay in scent. They put a lot of effort into making the outside flawless, including the well-chosen language, filtered postings, and polished grins. But you were like a glass, seeing right through everything. You were researching energy, while others were duped by looks. You were being cautioned while they were being wowed. You sensed the contradiction in their presence, the way their energy suggested turmoil even as their face spoke peace. Before you needed proof, rumor, or someone to screw up in front of you. Beneath all that glossy perfume, you could smell the rot. And more than anything else, that frightened people. They weren't exposed by you. They weren't made fun of by you. You didn't even have to speak. They felt uneasy just being in your truth, since you were like a mirror they didn't ask to gaze into. You frightened them because you saw them, not because you were passing judgment. Furthermore, they weren't prepared for that degree of attention. Since it allows them to hide, most individuals design their life around being misinterpreted. But there was no hiding with you. You saw the spiritual deadness underlying social charisma, detected artificial benevolence, and saw through the superficial charm. People tried to turn the tables on you because of this, accusing you of being too passionate, too deep, or negative. It served as a safeguard for them. In order to avoid having to face the truth that you unavoidably exposed, they had to make you the issue. But they knew in their hearts. They had a sense of being seen, but not in the way that boosts one's ego or dispels the lies they tell the world. The unfortunate thing is that you were simply being honest and weren't attempting to expose anyone. However, you were a menace in any environment full of illusions because of your capacity to see the unsaid and to sense what's festering behind the lovely surface. Now, when everything is breaking apart, they recall that you were aware of it beforehand, before the fissures became chaotic. Fifth, the shock to the community is not real. They didn't want to be the ones to say it, but they knew. In actuality, the community isn't really stunned by what transpired or by how everything came apart. They knew in their hearts the tension, the fakeness, the silent dysfunction that everyone feigned not to notice. They felt it too. However, they decided to remain silent. They decided to act blind, play nice, and keep their heads down. Why? Because pointing it out would mean jeopardizing their comfort, their reputation, and the mutual acceptance they sorely wanted. That was not the game you were playing. They are upset because you had the courage to publicly express what they were too afraid to acknowledge to themselves, not because you were incorrect. You didn't use coded language to conceal your reality or whisper behind closed doors. They were still holding on to the delusion when you expressed it honestly and unvarnished. What truly irritated them was not your tone, timing, or even delivery, but the fact that you destroyed their collective illusion. You were free. Being the antagonist in their narrative didn't scare you. You didn't fear losing followers, friends, or phony affiliations. They felt vulnerable because they shared your suspicions, but they chose to ignore them and keep a grin on their faces. You allowed yours to survive. You put that uncomfortable sensation into words. The mirror they were all feigning admiration for was broken by those remarks. They now perform shock. They act without warning. In actuality, though, they're shocked that you didn't recoil, that you didn't wait for approval to speak the truth, and that you stood by yourself while others hid in numbers, not that they're shocked by what happened. It's your audacity that makes them gasp, not the fall. Because one individual who won't lie with a group founded on false peace is the biggest threat to that organization. They were silent, not surprised. They are rushing to change history now that the truth cannot be avoided, hoping that people won't remember that you were the only one who spoke up when it mattered most. Sixth, you were accurate not just because you were intelligent, but also because you didn't mind losing people. Being smarter than everyone else didn't give you a miraculous advantage. Something even more uncommon was the source of your accuracy. You didn't fear losing people. That's what made you unique. Most people are emotionally connected to being liked, accepted, or protected, which is why they can't take the truth, not because they're ignorant. Their anxiety of standing by themselves causes their vision to become blurry. However, you were constructed differently. The crowd wasn't something you craved. You didn't deserve a round of applause. If it meant being true to the truth, you were prepared to be the one they avoided, the one they misinterpreted, and the one they muttered about. People assume that having insight or intellect is all that is required to perceive clearly. But loyalty is the true problem. Belonging is what most individuals are loyal to. You stuck to the truth. You were dangerous because of that. You didn't change the tone of your voice to blend in. To keep people at ease around you, you didn't sugarcoat your observations. You didn't exchange your inner calm for fleeting tranquility. Additionally, your spiritual vision remained clear since you were prepared to go alone. That's why your accuracy was so disturbing. You weren't afraid when you spoke. You didn't care about being liked. There was no personal agenda on your part. Regardless of who might leave as a result, you just stated what needed to be said. It's not common. That is holy. Power is that. How you kept calling things before they happened was beyond their comprehension. In actuality, though, you simply had nothing to lose. You weren't defending a phony relationship, a phony persona, or a shaky sense of yourself. You were already accustomed to being misinterpreted. You were looking for alignment, not for praise. They are now compelled to acknowledge that it wasn't chance when the truth comes to light precisely as you predicted. It was not conceit. It was insight gained by the type of bravery that most people aren't prepared to possess. Since it wasn't for sale, your vision was clear. Seventh, your clarity threatened their justifications, so they labeled you judgmental. You never entered a meeting with the intention of passing judgment on others. You never had that kind of enthusiasm. You weren't sitting around discrediting individuals by dissecting them. People felt condemned just by being in your company, though, since your soul refused to lie under duress and your presence conveyed truth. This was not because you blamed others, but rather because your silence made their own wrongdoing stand out. Your lucidity revealed the discrepancy between their stated identities and their actual actions. They were uneasy because of that. Therefore, they rewrote the story to avoid accepting responsibility. You're too judgmental. You're negative. You think you're better than everyone. No, you weren't contributing to the delusion. The performance wasn't something you were participating in. You weren't applauding chaos masquerading as individuality or dysfunction masquerading as love. You saw right through it. And when someone is steadfast in their justifications, everyone who challenges them is the adversary. To maintain their innocence, they had to portray you as the bad guy. To call you toxic was the simplest way to ignore your reality without facing it head-on. Since they would have to confront all the ways they had lied to themselves if they were able to acknowledge that you were simply being truthful, it provided them with a method to escape responsibility. However, you were discerning rather than passing judgment. There is a distinction. Distinction finds patterns, whereas judgment assaults character. You pointed out actions that smacked of avoidance, manipulation, or self-betrayal, rather than calling someone trash. You only refused to co-sign lies that they were too accustomed to telling themselves. You didn't cancel anyone. Because you didn't have to say much, they felt vulnerable in your presence. You had the feel of honesty. They weren't prepared for the reflection when you held up the mirror. Instead, they turned you away. However, that denial was really a last-ditch effort to preserve their story. It wasn't personal. And now that everything is falling apart, they are beginning to see that the one person who wasn't lying was the one they labeled as judgmental. Eighth, you're astonished by how long they believed they could pretend to be stable, not by people collapsing. You anticipated the collapse and were never surprised by it. The thing that truly astounds you is how long they believed they could continue the deed. The foundation as a whole was crumbling. There was a lack of energy. The dysfunction was yelling. However, they continued to embellish the illusion rather than making any corrections. As though they could hide decay with glitter, they increased the number of phony positives, grins, and diversions. You were perplexed, not impressed. With all that denial, how come people don't hear their own house creaking? They accused you of being negative when you brought it up. They accused you of stirring the pot, being neurotic, and concentrating on the negative. However, the kettle had already boiled over, and you were not stirring anything. All they were doing was acting as though it hadn't. You only recognized what was already on fire. And they intensified their efforts to act as though nothing was wrong, rather than confronting that reality. It was a poisonous connection. It was a pressure cooker at work. The neighborhood was collapsing. Additionally, they continued to behave as though your noticing was dramatic. In reality, what people referred to as paranormal or strange insight was just your honesty. You didn't deceive yourself into feeling better. You paid attention to what your soul and body were telling you. You listened. Additionally, you saw the deterioration early since you weren't deceiving yourself like others were. The blow-up didn't surprise you. What astonished you was how long it took. They were giving parties in a smoke-filled house, painting walls while the floor collapsed, and creating inspirational messages on the internet while their real lives were falling apart. As if no one could have predicted it, they grasped their pearls when the disaster occurred. However, you were aware. You were constantly aware. You perceived what they referred to as collapse as delayed effects. You just had the courage to confront calamity before it manifested itself. You didn't foresee it. And they never comprehended that part. 9. The reason you were selected is that you don't require the system to validate your knowledge. You weren't chosen because you met all the requirements or because you fit neatly into a box. The world picked you because you can see what's genuine without anyone's permission. To prove your knowledge, you don't wait for a committee, a crowd, or a certificate. Your truth is independent of followers, likes, and the newest popular viewpoint. You possess a knowledge that is so profound and unwavering that outside confirmation is only background noise. To inform them what to believe or whom to trust, most individuals require a system, a hierarchy, a label, or a community. Without it, they float aimlessly, always questioning themselves. However, because your base is within, you remain strong. Applause and unanimity are not necessary for your knowledge to emerge from. Because of this, even when everyone else is engrossed in denial or misunderstanding, you can see plainly. Your perspective stays clear because you aren't preoccupied with social acceptability or fame. Sometimes the truth isn't loud or well-liked. It doesn't come with certificates of authenticity or glistening packaging. It might be quiet, delicate, and difficult to bear on your own at times. The world therefore places this burden on those who can carry it without faltering. People who don't require approval aren't susceptible to deception. Doubt and herd mentality don't readily sway them. With a compass pointing directly toward reality, they travel steadily. You are selected because you exhibit that uncommon level of self-reliance. You're speaking what you know and being who you are without waiting for approval. You are silent, unwavering, and indestructible, carrying truth like armor. And you're already living it while others rush to find evidence. You have that kind of power. Regardless of what other people may think, it's about being authentic, not about being correct. Number 10. You just realized the grin didn't reach their eyes. You didn't foresee treachery. You could see treachery coming without a crystal ball. It was straightforward, harsh observation, rather than a great prophecy or a spectacular vision. You noticed the little things, the tiny cracks in their facade that no one else dared to look at. While everyone else was engrossed in the polished smiles, the practiced kindness, and the endless positive vibes only talk. These little moments weren't accidental. They were rehearsed performances concealing something darker underneath. For example, their smile didn't quite reach their eyes. They suddenly fell silent when your success became the topic. Or they hesitated when they said, "I'm happy for you." Because you listened to what others didn't say, you noticed what others missed. You heard the pauses between their sentences, the passion they attempted to cover up with phony coziness. In order to be caught off guard with a tidy justification, most individuals like betrayal to be loud, dramatic, and evident. However, treachery is frequently silent, cunning, and disguised so well that even the deceived are reluctant to believe it. Because you observed the rehearsal, the practice runs, and the way they tested your faith without uttering a word, you were able to see it before it became apparent. You were practical, not pessimistic or paranoid. You realized that devotion isn't always implied by a grin. Not all displays of concern are sincere. You realized that treachery whispers rather than erupts in pyrotechnics. It persists. The crack gets too loud to ignore as the stress increases. And you weren't shocked when it detonated at last. You weren't surprised, because you never allowed the performance to blind you. You just knew it was coming. Your understanding seemed like a danger to them because of this. In order to maintain their roles and masks, they wanted the illusion to endure. However, you declined to comply. You believed that deeper understanding because you could see the reality in the eyes beneath the grins. You were the only one listening, and that quiet rehearsal wasn't only a warning, it was the betrayal crafting its own script. Number 11. People were triggered by you because you embodied the self they were too scared to be. Your integrity, bravery, and wisdom made you a target rather than a fan club. You lived your truth out loud, unvarnished, and unadulterated. You didn't simply say it. People are frightened by that type of candor because it makes them face a side of themselves they have been too afraid to acknowledge. They admire the courage they wish they possessed in you. The courage to take off the mask, to stand for yourself, and to say what others only mutter in private. You broke the idea that hiding behind masks was secure, in addition to upsetting their comfort zones. You held up a mirror that many people didn't want to look into when you entered a room without acting or smoothing your edges. Their anxieties, vulnerabilities, and the aspects of themselves they were frantically trying to hide were all mirrored in that mirror. Furthermore, individuals frequently react with defensiveness or rage rather than adoration when they perceive something in another person that they are afraid of. You turned to become the personification of the reality they desired but were too scared to assert. They weren't criticizing you. They were grappling with their own darkness and projecting it onto you because it was easier than confronting it themselves. That's why they branded you too much, too harsh, or unreasonable. Their complacency was brought to light by your bravery. Their denial was revealed by your knowledge, and they were exposed by your reluctance to fit in. It was your destiny to be that unvarnished, unrepentant version of yourself. It wasn't a choice. It also made you stand out as someone the world needed, but seldom ever accepted, even while it kept you separate from many others. Not only were you leading an authentic life, but you were also pushing others around you to change or remain anonymous. Holding that position is weighty, and that's why you set so many people off. You were the brave version of themselves that they were too scared to be. Number 12. They don't understand it until their reality collapses, but you've always been years ahead. You've lived in a future that most people can't ever fathom, and you've never been just one step ahead. You could already see the fractures, the warning signals, and the impending collapse while they were busy holding on to their illusions and changing the narrative to suit their comfort. Being awake while everyone else decides to sleep is more important than having psychic abilities or good fortune. When someone rolled their eyes or chuckled, you pointed it out. They didn't want to hear the realities you told them. You didn't cushion the impact or sugarcoat it. When faced with a reality they weren't prepared for, you kept your ground. As a result, you were ignored for a long time. Your worries were dismissed as negativity, and your observations were disregarded. People like to think that there are simple solutions and pleasant ends. Without any sacrifice or significant change, they wish to have faith that things will turn out okay. However, you refused to compromise your ideals or yourself. You were prepared to pay the cost of disregarding the truth because you were aware of it. Thus, you remained ahead and saw how their course headed directly to catastrophe. Your remarks suddenly carried weight as their well-constructed universe started to break apart, and their cozy reality ultimately collapsed. Your negative energy changed into warnings that were sacred, not merely intelligent. You turned into the voice they wished they had heard sooner. However, by then, the opportunity for making changes is frequently closing quickly. They can no longer evade the repercussions of the teachings you attempted to impart. It's not just about being correct. It's about having a vision so strong and distinct that it both protects and separates you. You were attempting to prepare them, not to frighten them. You continue to go on, prepared for the next step, since you've always been living there, years ahead, alone but awake. Whereas many only comprehend your message when their own world cracks. Number 13. The collective decision to remain blind was the true adversary, never the people themselves. You were battling against a collective decision, a huge, quiet agreement to ignore the situation and act as though nothing was wrong, rather than against specific people. It was systemic, not personal. The unseen pact they formed with themselves and one another to remain oblivious to unpleasant realities was the true adversary, not the individuals standing in front of you. Since acknowledging what was happening would have rocked the foundation of their identities, comfort zones, and lives, they didn't want to do so. You weren't simply opposing a person when you intervened with your candor and clarity. You were against this entire unwritten agreement. The response was so strong because of this. The issue was your reluctance to respect the collective untruth, not if you were correct or not. They banded together to preserve their common delusion, rather than to stand up for the truth. Mutual denial, a safety net fashioned from selective blindness, was the group's strength. You said you were going to rip that net apart. A force field is created by this collective ignorance. It makes individuals oblivious to facts, reasoning, and even emotions. It explains why pointing out the truth might feel like swimming upstream in a storm and why reason can fail. The weight of the group's agreement to disregard what is directly in front of them, rather than any one person's denial, is what really has power. You were fighting the aggregate momentum of avoidance rather than specific people. Knowing this is important because, despite how it may seem, your fight isn't personal. It indicates that their rejection of you is a coping technique for an unpleasant truth they aren't prepared to confront, not a reflection on your value or wisdom. Comfort is prioritized over clarity by the collective. And that's a battle that transcends all individuals. Realizing this relieves you of the pressure to persuade or alter everyone. Breaking their agreement is their responsibility, not yours. It is your responsibility to remain loyal to yourself, maintain your integrity, and wait until the group is unable to ignore the truth you represent. Number 14. You were sent ahead to get ready for the collapse, not only to watch what was coming. You weren't merely fortunate to see what was approaching. You were sent there before the mayhem for a reason that no one else could comprehend. You are a heavenly first responder sent before the collapse to lay the ground for what must rise later. You did not fall into this role by chance or suffer as a result of your insight. You were steadfast, creating, adjusting, and making room for the new reality that awaited you on the other side, while others fumbled in bewilderment or denial. Being selected entails bearing a burden that most people refuse to bear. The weight of the truth, which is lonely, since so few can empathize. However, this weight is a blueprint as well. Not only were you correct about what was going to happen, but you also set an example for others to follow in terms of change, clarity, and resilience. Because you were created in the fires before anyone else noticed the smoke, you possess the traits necessary to manage what happens after the collapse. You are ahead of your time, which is why your trip has occasionally been lonely, not because you are disconnected. When the world isn't ready, your strength and knowledge look like curses, but such attributes become priceless when everything breaks down. You are an architect, not only a witness. You were deployed to guard the area where devastation stops and reconstruction starts. You were sent to prepare salvation, not to foretell disaster. Your role is one of preparedness and renewal, not of dread or despair. And even though it could seem like a big undertaking, keep in mind that the old foundation must be dismantled before any new one can be built. You were picked because you possess the foresight, bravery, and tenacity to persevere when everything else fails. You are the living blueprint for the future, just waiting to be revealed. You are not a victim of foreknowledge. You stand out in ways that few can really comprehend because of the realities you've been experiencing, the truths you've been carrying, and the visions you've dared to see. The community's current shock? It's not because they were caught off guard. Rather, it's because you were the one with the courage to speak out and say what everyone else was just whispering. Not only did you see the storm coming, but you stood squarely in its path, fearless and unflinching, with a clarity that made others uneasy, yet prevented you from stumbling into the same pitfalls. You are on a difficult journey. It's weighty, lonely, and frequently misinterpreted. However, it also has great power. You are the silent power that alters reality, the calm presence amidst the tumult, and the defender of facts that will not be concealed any longer. Recall that being selected is about strength, the ability to maintain the unadulterated truth, while others choose for cozy delusions rather than popularity or comfort. When everyone else is clinging to denial, it's about having the guts to stand alone. Instead of suffering, you were sent ahead to lead the way, create, and be ready for what comes next. Your wisdom is a light, not a weight. All of your doubts, labels, and backlash were just the cost of being a light so brilliant that it threatens the darkness that others have been accustomed to. Your clarity will endure, while the community's astonishment will subside. The world will start to catch up to you the instant they learn what you've been carrying all along. Stay rooted in your truth till then, unfazed by rejection or criticism. It is your purpose to change, not to blend in. The basis for a future that respects reality rather than denial is the gift you possess: the vision, the bravery, and the unwavering clarity. By continuing on this road, you are not only surviving the collapse, but also creating the daybreak that will follow. Keep your head held high and your spirit ferocious. Though history will remember the selected ones who saw clearly, stood strong, and changed everything, the world may be surprised right now. Don't keep this message to yourself if it spoke to you. Click the subscribe button to become a part of the awake and conscious community. If this video resonated with you on a deep level, please like it and leave a comment below to share your truth or what you've been witnessing before others do. This might be the spark that wakes someone up today, so share it with those who need to hear it. Together, we are the ones influencing the future rather than only being spectators. Now, more than ever, the world needs this insight, so please subscribe, like, comment, and share.